Apache woman shot to kill. The rancher caught the arrow and claimed her fate. The sun was just beginning to climb over the jagged mountains, painting the dry, dusty plains in soft orange and gold. The wind moved slowly, carrying the smell of sagebrush and the faint smoke from a distant campfire. The New Mexico ranch lay in this lonely stretch of land, a few weathered wooden buildings surrounded by fences made of rough-cut timber. It was a place where life was hard, and everyone learned early how to rely on themselves. At the edge of the main ranch house, a man worked quietly. He was tall and strong, with hands hardened by years of work with cattle, horses, and the unforgiving land. His name was Jeremiah, though everyone in the nearby town simply called him the rancher. His face was weather-beaten, with lines around his eyes that told stories of long days under the hot sun. Jeremiah was not a man of many words, but his eyes carried a sharp intelligence and an understanding of the land that only came with experience. The morning had begun as usual. Jeremiah checked the pens, feeding the horses and cows, making sure no animal had wandered off during the night. He moved with the confidence of someone who had spent his life in this rugged wilderness. The ranch was his home, but he knew it was also fragile. Out here, danger could come in many forms: wild animals, harsh weather, and sometimes people with intentions he could not predict. That was when he first noticed her. From the corner of his eye, he saw movement near the tree line that bordered the ranch. He froze, not because he was afraid, but because he had learned long ago that sudden movements in the open land were rarely harmless. He squinted against the sunlight and saw her, a woman moving silently among the sparse trees and bushes. She was tall, lean, and fast, and her dark hair caught the light as she moved. Jeremiah had heard stories of Apache women, brave, strong, and skilled in ways most could not imagine. But seeing her here, alone and so careful in her movements, made him feel a mix of caution and curiosity. The woman seemed to glide over the dry grass, making no sound, yet her presence was undeniable. She carried a bow in her hand, the curved wood smooth and dark, with an arrow already nocked and ready. Her eyes were sharp, scanning the area as if she could read every detail at a glance. Jeremiah understood immediately that she was not here by accident. Something in her stance told him she had a purpose, and it was likely dangerous. He did not move, letting her presence settle into the quiet morning. The ranch had always been a place of work and routine, but now it felt different, like the air itself held its breath. Birds that had been singing moments ago had gone silent, and even the wind seemed to pause. Jeremiah's mind raced through the possibilities. Was she scouting the land? Searching for someone? Or had she come with the intention to harm? Jeremiah had faced danger many times before: wild animals that could crush a man with a single strike, harsh storms that could destroy everything in a few hours. But nothing had prepared him for this feeling, a tension that came from knowing he was being watched by someone who could strike faster than most men could even react. He had learned to respect fear, not let it control him. And so he stayed still, his eyes locked on the figure moving gracefully among the trees. The woman stopped for a moment, crouching slightly behind a large boulder. She looked directly at him, and Jeremiah felt a strange connection, a silent communication. She was not like the strangers who had passed through the area before. There was intelligence in her eyes, a sharpness that suggested she understood much more than she let on. And yet, there was caution, too, a hesitation as if she were weighing her choices carefully. Jeremiah reached slowly for the small knife he always kept at his belt, not because he wanted to fight, but because it was a part of being prepared. His hand moved with careful precision, the muscles in his arm tensing without drawing attention. He knew that sudden movements could provoke her, and that was the last thing he wanted. He needed to understand her intentions before anything else. The woman moved again, silently and gracefully. She stepped closer to the edge of the trees, her eyes never leaving his. Jeremiah noticed the way she carried herself, confident, alert, and ready for anything. There was a story in her movements, though he could not yet read it. Perhaps she had traveled far, lived through hardships, or faced enemies he would never know. He could feel the weight of her presence, heavy and serious, yet respectful in its own way. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. The sun climbed higher, warming the land, and Jeremiah could feel sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. He kept his breathing steady, listening for the smallest sound that could tell him more about her. Every small rustle of leaves, every shift of shadows was a potential clue. He had learned to read the land, to notice things most people overlooked. And now he applied that skill to the woman before him. Then, without warning, she raised the bow. Jeremiah's heart skipped a beat, though he forced himself to remain calm. He could see the tension in her arms, the precision with which she aimed. The arrow gleamed in the sunlight, sharp and deadly. The moment seemed to stretch forever. as if time itself had slowed. Jeremiah understood that this could be the most dangerous instant of his life, yet he did not move out of fear. He moved out of habit, out of instinct, out of respect for the skill and determination of the person before him. He felt a strange mixture of fear and admiration. This woman was not acting recklessly. She was precise, disciplined, and determined. He had faced many men and animals who underestimated him, but this was different. He had never encountered someone like her, and yet he could not bring himself to see her as an enemy. There was a story in her eyes, a reason behind her actions that went beyond mere aggression. Jeremiah's mind raced through possibilities, imagining why she was here, what had brought her to this land, and what she might want. He had faced danger and survived it before, but this situation was different. It was personal, immediate, and sharp, like the arrow she held ready in her hands. He knew he needed to act carefully, to understand her motives before making a move that could change both of their lives forever. As the seconds passed, a strange silence settled over the ranch. The birds had stopped singing, the wind had paused, and even the cattle seemed to sense that something important was happening. Jeremiah and the woman were alone in this moment, each waiting, each observing, each aware of the delicate balance between life and death. He could feel the weight of history, of culture, of survival, pressing down on him, and he knew that how he acted in the next moments would matter more than anything before. Finally, Jeremiah made a small, deliberate movement, shifting slightly to show he meant no harm. The woman's eyes flickered, and for the first time he saw a hint of curiosity in hers. It was a brief, almost imperceptible expression, but it told him something important. She was not just a hunter or a fighter. She was a human being, with her own thoughts, fears, and reasons. And in that instant, Jeremiah realized that understanding her might be the only way to survive this encounter. The sun climbed higher, casting a warm glow over the land. Jeremiah kept his eyes on the woman, aware that each moment could bring a sudden change, a threat or an opportunity. He felt the tension in his body, the awareness that his life and hers were connected in this fragile moment. And though he could not yet know what would happen next, he understood that this encounter, unexpected, dangerous, and strange, would leave a mark on both of them, shaping the rest of their lives in ways they could not yet see. He took a slow, careful breath, readying himself for whatever would come next. The woman adjusted her grip on the bow, and Jeremiah could see the determination in her posture. They were two strangers, bound by circumstance, in a silent standoff that tested courage, patience, and understanding. In the quiet of the New Mexico plains, under the rising sun, the story of their meeting was just beginning. And in that vast, unforgiving landscape, where life was hard and danger could come from any direction, Jeremiah and the Apache woman faced the beginning of a moment that would define them both. The wind had shifted slightly by mid-morning, carrying a faint smell of dry earth and distant pine. Jeremiah's eyes stayed fixed on the figure at the edge of the tree line. Every muscle in his body was alert, yet he made no sudden moves. The woman had not stepped closer, but she had not left either. It was as if she were testing him, trying to understand who he was before making her next move. Jeremiah's mind raced. He had spent countless years reading the land, noticing small changes in the way animals moved, or the subtle differences in wind and shadows. But this was different. No amount of experience could prepare a man for someone who seemed almost invisible, yet entirely present. Someone who could move like the wind, but whose eyes held a storm of intention. Suddenly the woman shifted her stance. She lowered herself slightly, crouching behind a large boulder as if it were the safest place on earth. Jeremiah's heart began to beat faster. Not out of fear, but because he sensed the moment was building towards something he could not yet see. He knew she had come here with a purpose, and that purpose might be deadly. Jeremiah adjusted his position slightly, keeping his hands visible but ready. He wanted to show her that he was not careless, but also that he meant no immediate harm. Years of experience had taught him that tension could be diffused before it erupted into violence. He needed patience. In the distance, a few crows cried as they circled the trees, sensing movement below. Even the animals seemed to pause in anticipation. The woman's movements were precise, almost mechanical. She pulled an arrow from her quiver with careful fingers and placed it on the bowstring. Jeremiah's eyes widened slightly as he saw the sharp tip glint in the sunlight. The arrow was not a simple tool. It was a weapon honed for accuracy and force. She knocked it, pulled the string taut, and paused. Her eyes met his, and in that brief moment, Jeremiah felt the intensity of her focus. Time seemed to stretch. Each heartbeat was loud in his ears, each breath a reminder of the fragility of life. Jeremiah's mind raced through possible outcomes. If the arrow came, he needed to survive, and he needed to understand why she had aimed it at him. He had faced many dangerous situations before, but this was unlike anything he had encountered. The skill, speed, and courage of this woman created a challenge that tested every instinct he possessed. He remembered his training and his experience. The ranch had taught him how to anticipate danger, how to act calmly in moments of crisis, and how to use the environment to his advantage. But this was not an animal he could corner, nor a storm he could wait out. This was a human being, with intelligence, skill, and intent. That made every decision critical, every move potentially life-saving or disastrous. As she released the arrow, Jeremiah felt a flash of instinct. His body reacted faster than thought, moving in a precise motion that had been drilled into him over years of working with cattle and defending his property. His hands shot forward, and with almost impossible timing, he caught the arrow mid-flight. The sharp point grazed his palm, drawing a line of blood, but the force was absorbed by his grip. He froze for a moment, feeling the sudden sharp pain and the weight of what had just occurred. The woman stopped, her eyes wide, with shock and disbelief. She had not expected him to react so quickly, to intercept her arrow before it could reach its mark. Her stance wavered slightly, and Jeremiah noticed for the first time the human vulnerability beneath her skilled exterior. She was not a machine, nor was she invincible. She was strong, precise, and brave, but she was also human. Jeremiah's heart still raced, but he forced himself to speak, his voice calm and steady despite the adrenaline. "I don't want to fight," he said. "I mean no harm. Put the bow down, and we can talk." His words were simple, but they carried authority. He understood the importance of communication in tense situations. Sometimes words were stronger than weapons. The woman hesitated. Her grip on the bow tightened, but the arrow was no longer in flight. Jeremiah took a careful step closer, keeping his hands visible, showing he would not attack. He understood her fear. Anyone defending their land, their life, or their beliefs would act quickly, especially if they felt threatened. You respected that instinct. Minutes passed like hours as they studied each other. Jeremiah could see the intelligence in her eyes, the cautious calculation of someone who had survived through skill, awareness, and strength. He understood that this was more than an attack. It was a test. She had measured him, judged him, and perhaps even considered whether he was worth trusting. Jeremiah held the arrow carefully, showing no sign of anger or fear. His eyes met hers, and in that moment, an unspoken understanding began to form. He recognized the courage it took to aim at someone so directly, and he also recognized the humanity in her hesitation. Both of them were survivors, shaped by the harsh realities of the land, and both understood that a single decision could change everything. Slowly, the woman lowered her bow slightly, though she did not release it entirely. She remained cautious, but her posture relaxed just enough to show she was reconsidering her approach. Jeremiah took another step, calm but deliberate, and spoke again. "I am not your enemy. I only want to understand why you are here. Please, tell me." His voice carried empathy, the kind that came from a lifetime of living with the land and respecting those who shared it. The woman's eyes flickered with emotion. Jeremiah noticed a subtle shift, a mix of curiosity, caution, and something that could almost be called respect. She was considering his words, weighing the risk of trust against the instinct to defend herself. It was a delicate balance, one that required both courage and wisdom. Jeremiah knew the importance of patience. He had learned that in moments of tension, rushing could ruin everything. He remained still, breathing steadily, showing her that he was neither reckless nor threatening. The desert around them was silent, save for the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds. Time moved differently here, stretching each second into a lesson in observation and restraint. Finally, the woman spoke, her voice low but steady. "I had no choice," she said, though the words carried a weight that Jeremiah could not yet fully understand. She did not lower the bow completely, but her tone suggested a beginning of explanation. It was the first step toward understanding, and Jeremiah knew that the moment had shifted. He nodded slowly, careful not to make sudden movements. "Then tell me," he said. "I want to understand, not fight." His hands remained open, holding the arrow carefully, a sign that he was ready to listen rather than react. He felt the first real connection in this tense encounter, a thread of trust beginning to form in the midst of fear and uncertainty. The woman studied him for a long moment. Jeremiah could see the thought process in her eyes, the way she measured risk, skill, and intention. It was a test of character, a moment that would define both of them if handled correctly. She lowered her bow just enough to show she was willing to speak, but the arrow was still nocked, a reminder of the delicate balance between life and death in this encounter. As the wind moved again, Jeremiah noticed the faint glint of sweat on her brow, the small tension in her shoulders, and the way she kept her weight balanced on the balls of her feet. She was ready for anything, and he admired her skill and focus. Yet beneath the tension there was a shared understanding. Both had survived in a harsh world, both had faced danger, and both recognized the value of careful decisions. They spoke slowly, exchanging words that revealed fragments of history, intention, and circumstance. Jeremiah learned that she was not there out of malice, but out of necessity, driven by reasons that were complex and personal, and she began to see that he was not merely a rancher, but a man shaped by experience, strength, and respect for life. Each word, each pause, built a fragile bridge between them, one that might lead to understanding rather than violence. The sun climbed higher, casting warm light over the plains. Jeremiah could feel the tension in his muscles slowly ease, replaced by cautious curiosity. The arrow in his hand was no longer a weapon. It was a symbol of a moment that could change everything. He understood that in the wild, moments like this were rare and precious. One wrong move, and the outcome could have been tragic. But handled with care, it could lead to understanding and perhaps even a fragile bond. The woman finally relaxed her stance, though she remained alert. Jeremiah placed the arrow down carefully, a gesture of respect and trust. It was a small step, but it carried enormous significance. In that moment, both recognized that they had faced a turning point, a moment that had tested skill, courage, and understanding. And though neither knew what would happen next, they both understood that the encounter had already left its mark on their lives. The moment after the arrow was caught seemed to stretch endlessly. The wind whispered through the dry grasses, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Jeremiah stood still, feeling the faint sting in his palm from the arrow's sharp tip. The woman, her bow still in hand, had retreated a few steps, her eyes never leaving him. Neither made a sudden movement. In that silence, the land itself seemed to hold its breath. Jeremiah could feel the weight of the standoff pressing on him. It was not just about the arrow or the skill it took to catch it. It was about understanding what drove the woman to aim at him in the first place. He had faced danger before, but this was different. She was not an animal, not an enemy he could easily read. She was a person, a human being shaped by survival, strength, and perhaps a story that he could only guess at. He shifted slightly, careful not to make her think he was preparing to attack. Every instinct he had screamed to be ready, but he also knew that rushing would ruin the fragile balance of trust that had begun to form. He had learned long ago that patience was sometimes the most powerful weapon a man could carry. The woman was watching him closely, studying his movements as if she could read his very thoughts. Jeremiah's mind wandered for a moment, considering the stories he had heard about Apache women. Brave, skilled, and often underestimated by outsiders, they were known for their intelligence and independence. But seeing her in person, in the quiet tension of the New Mexico plains, made him realize that legends could never capture the reality of a human life shaped by courage and necessity. She was alive, present, and determined, and her eyes told him she had faced challenges far greater than his own. The woman crouched slightly behind a small boulder, the bow still in her hands. She did not lower it completely, but her posture had changed. There was less aggression now, more calculation. Jeremiah noticed how carefully she placed her feet, how her eyes scanned the land, and how her breathing remained steady. She was aware of him, but she was also aware of her surroundings, ready to act if needed. Minutes passed in silence. Jeremiah could feel the tension building like a storm ready to break. He knew that any sudden movement, any careless gesture, could reignite the danger. Yet there was also a strange sense of connection forming. Both had survived in harsh conditions, both understood the value of skill and observation, and both recognized that this encounter was more than a mere test of strength. He spoke softly, breaking the silence. "You do not have to do this," he said. His voice was calm but carried authority. "I will not harm you. We can find another way." His words were deliberate, meant to convey respect rather than command. He understood that trust was earned in moments like this, and that fear could only be eased with patience and understanding. The woman's eyes flickered with something difficult to read, perhaps hesitation, perhaps curiosity. She did not respond immediately. Instead, she shifted slightly, adjusting her stance as if reconsidering her next move. Jeremiah noticed the subtle changes in her posture, the way her muscles tensed and relaxed. She was alert, yet not reckless. Every action was measured, precise, and deliberate. Jeremiah took another careful step forward, showing that he meant no harm. "I want to understand why you are here," he said. "You do not have to fight. We can talk." His words were simple, but in the tense stillness of the plains, they carried weight. The woman studied him, her eyes narrowing slightly as if weighing the sincerity of his statement. She was cautious, but there was a spark of curiosity, a question forming in her mind about whether this man could be trusted. For a long moment, neither moved. The wind carried the faint sound of distant cattle, the occasional rustle of leaves, and the far-off call of a hawk. Jeremiah felt the isolation of the place, the vast emptiness of the land that surrounded them. It was a harsh world, one that demanded respect for survival. And in that emptiness, two lives met, balanced on the edge of understanding and conflict. He thought about his own life, the years he had spent tending the ranch, facing storms, sickness, and occasional danger. He realized that, despite all he had experienced, this encounter was unique. He had never faced someone whose skill and determination matched his own, whose presence commanded attention without a single word. There was a respect forming silently between them, unspoken but powerful. The woman finally spoke, her voice low but steady. "You are different from the others," she said. "You did not run, you did not attack. You acted with care." Her words were cautious, yet they carried meaning. Jeremiah understood that she was beginning to see him not as an enemy, but as someone who might understand her. "I would be so happy," he nodded slightly, careful not to make sudden movements. "I respect strength," he said, "but I also respect life. There is no need for blood to be spilled here." His words were not just about the moment. They were about the principles that had guided him for years, about the careful balance between survival and compassion. The woman's eyes softened slightly, though her stance remained alert. She had been trained to act quickly, to defend herself with speed and precision. Yet now she was reconsidering her options, weighing the risk of continued aggression against the possibility of understanding. Jeremiah could see the struggle in her eyes, the conflict between instinct and choice. He took another small step forward, careful and deliberate, keeping his hands visible. "Tell me your story," he said. "I want to understand why you came here." His voice was calm, carrying empathy and patience. He knew that speaking gently, without pressure, was sometimes the only way to reach someone who had lived with fear and danger. The woman remained silent for a long moment. Jeremiah could feel the tension in her body, the readiness to act, the sharp focus in her eyes. But he also sensed a shift. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she lowered her bow slightly. It was not complete surrender, but it was a sign that she was willing to listen, to consider another path. Jeremiah noticed the small details, the way she shifted her weight, the way her hands relaxed slightly, the way her eyes held a flicker of curiosity. He realized that she was human, not just a figure of skill and fear, but someone capable of thought, reflection, and choice. And in that realization, he felt a small measure of hope. The wind moved again, carrying a faint scent of sagebrush and earth. Jeremiah spoke again gently. "We are not enemies. We can find a way through this without harming each other." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of experience and understanding. He hoped they would reach her, that they would bridge the gap between caution and trust. The woman studied him, her eyes flickering with emotion. She had lived a life that demanded constant vigilance, and yet here she was, pausing, considering the possibility of dialogue instead of violence. Jeremiah understood the courage it took to make that choice, to consider trust in a world that often punished it. Minutes passed, each stretching longer than the last. The standoff had become a quiet conversation of glances, gestures, and careful movements. Both were aware of the other's skill, intelligence, and presence. Both understood that a single action could change everything. And both were beginning to see that understanding could be more powerful than fear or aggression. Finally, the woman spoke again, her voice low but clear. "I did not come here to kill," she said. "I came because I had no choice, because I had to protect what is mine." Her words carried honesty, and Jeremiah could hear the truth in them. He nodded, understanding that her actions were shaped by survival, by necessity, and by a life lived on the edge of danger. He smiled slightly, a gesture of reassurance. "Then we can talk," he said. "We can find another way." His words were careful, deliberate, and filled with patience. He knew that the next moments would be crucial, that the bridge between them had to be crossed with care and understanding. The woman relaxed her stance further, though she remained cautious. The bow was lowered, and her hands were no longer tense with immediate threat. Jeremiah felt a sense of relief, though he remained alert. The standoff had shifted from confrontation to cautious understanding, a delicate balance that required attention, patience, and respect. The sun climbed higher, casting warm light over the plains. The desert was alive with subtle sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds, the faint movements of wildlife. In that vast, unforgiving landscape, two people had faced a moment that tested courage, skill, and understanding. And in that moment they had chosen patience and dialogue over violence, a choice that would shape the rest of their encounter. Jeremiah took a deep breath, feeling the tension in his muscles ease slightly. He could see the woman studying him, and he understood that she too was considering the new path before them. It was fragile, uncertain, but it was real. And in the vastness of the plains, where life was harsh and danger could come from any direction, this fragile connection was a rare and precious thing. The sun had climbed higher, spilling warm light across the plains, but the tension in the air remained. Jeremiah watched the woman carefully, his hand still steady despite the memory of the arrow's sting. She was silent now, but the weight of her gaze carried meaning. It was a look that spoke of experience, of history, and of something deeper than what could be seen on the surface. For a long moment neither spoke. Words were not needed yet. The land itself seemed to hum with the quiet understanding that something significant was unfolding. Jeremiah finally broke the silence, his voice calm but careful. "I can see you are not here for simple mischief," he said. "There is a reason behind your actions, and I want to understand it." He spoke slowly, aware that every word mattered. The woman's eyes flickered, and for the first time Jeremiah thought he saw hesitation mixed with relief. She had aimed her arrow with precision and intent, but perhaps now she sensed that she would not be met with anger. Her voice was soft when she spoke, almost as if the words had been held inside for a long time. "I am here because I had no other choice," she said. Her English was careful, deliberate, and she spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. "The land you call your ranch. It is near what belongs to my people. We have survived for generations, protecting what we need to live. I saw you, and I feared that you would take what was ours without knowing." Jeremiah listened, nodding slowly. He had faced misunderstandings before, moments where fear and survival drove people to act against each other. But hearing her speak, he realized there was depth in her words that went beyond the immediate danger. She was not cruel. She was cautious. She had acted from fear, from necessity, from a desire to protect her people and her land. He understood that, and he respected it. "I understand," he said carefully. "I am not here to take anything that belongs to anyone else. I have worked this land, yes, but I respect the people who lived here before me. I do not want to fight, and I do not want to harm anyone." His voice was steady, carrying sincerity. He could see her eyes searching for honesty, looking for evidence that he spoke the truth. The woman's stance softened, though she still kept her bow close. "Many people do not understand," she said. "They see us as obstacles, as stories or dangers, but they do not see us as humans. We live, we struggle, we protect what we have. You acted differently. You did not attack immediately, even when I aimed at you. That matters." Her words were honest, filled with meaning, and Jeremiah felt the weight of them. She was not praising him in the way one might praise a friend. She was acknowledging a choice, a rare act of respect in a world where fear often dictated action. Jeremiah nodded, letting a small smile touch his face. "Respect is earned," he said. "And it is given, too. You have your reasons, I have mine. We both survive in this land because we understand it, because we know how to read it, and because we know how to respect it. That is why you aimed at me, and why I caught your arrow. I understood the danger, and you understood the skill it took to survive it." The woman lowered her bow completely, though she did not yet relax fully. She took a cautious step forward, measuring the distance, measuring the man before her. "You speak of understanding," she said, "but can a person from your world truly understand what it means to live as we do? To face danger every day, to defend your people and your home with nothing but skill and courage?" Jeremiah looked out over the plains, the wide expanse of land stretching for miles, and then back at her. "I may not know exactly what it is like," he admitted, "but I know fear and I know courage. I have lived with danger, and I have learned to respect those who survive it. That is why I do not act without thought, and that is why I will not harm you. I see your courage and I respect it." Her eyes softened, and for the first time a faint smile appeared. It was not a smile of friendship, not yet, but a small acknowledgement that she had found someone who could recognize her truth without judgment. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly, and she stepped a little closer, though still cautious. Jeremiah could see that this was a fragile moment, delicate and uncertain. Every gesture mattered, every word carried weight. He spoke again, gently. "We can share this land without fear. We do not have to fight. I will not take from you, and I will not let anyone harm you here. That is my promise." The woman studied him, and Jeremiah could feel her considering the offer, weighing the risk of trust against the instinct to protect herself. It was not an easy choice. She had lived in a world where trust could lead to danger, where people often acted without care for those who were different. Yet, here was a man who did not rush, who did not strike out, who had acted with skill, courage, and patience. That combination was rare, and she could sense it. "I will speak," she said finally. Her voice was quiet but firm. "You need to understand the reasons behind what I did. You must understand why I aimed at you. It is not personal, but it is necessary." She paused, gathering her thoughts, and Jeremiah waited patiently. He knew that pushing her would break the fragile trust forming between them. Silence, when combined with patience, could speak louder than words. She began her story. "Our people have faced hardship for many years. We have been moved from our lands. Our homes have been taken, and we have had to learn how to survive in a world that does not always understand us. We live with danger every day, storms, hunger, strangers who do not see the value in our ways. I have learned to move quietly, to act quickly, to protect what is mine. That is why I came here today. I needed to see, to understand, and to defend." Jeremiah listened intently, nodding slowly. He could see the honesty in her eyes, the weight of experience in her voice. She had lived through challenges he could not fully imagine, yet he could feel the courage and determination in every word. "I understand more than you know," he said. "It takes strength to survive like that. And it takes wisdom to know when to fight and when to pause. You have both, and that is why you are still here." The woman's posture softened further. She lowered her bow entirely, placing it gently on the ground. Her hands were no longer tense, and she allowed herself to breathe more easily. For the first time, Jeremiah saw the vulnerability beneath the skill and determination, a glimpse of the human being behind the warrior. "You could have been hurt," she said quietly, "or worse. And yet you spoke with calm, not anger. You showed patience instead of fear. That is unusual." Jeremiah smiled faintly, feeling the tension ease in his chest. "It is not always easy," he said, "but it is worth trying. Understanding can prevent harm, and respect can build bridges where fear only builds walls." His voice was steady, carrying a quiet wisdom shaped by years of survival and experience. The woman looked out over the plains, her eyes thoughtful. "Perhaps there is more to this land than just survival," she said. "Perhaps there is also understanding, if one is willing to seek it." Her words were soft but meaningful. She had begun to see a possibility she had not considered before, that two people from different worlds, with different experiences, could find a way to respect one another. Jeremiah stepped closer, carefully, and spoke gently. "We can learn from each other. We can share this land, at least in part, without fear. I have lived here for years, and I know it is harsh, but it is also beautiful. And it is more so when we act with respect rather than fear." The woman nodded slowly. She did not speak for a long moment, but the softening of her eyes, the relaxation of her stance, and the faint warmth of her expression all spoke volumes. They were beginning to bridge the distance between them, not just physically but emotionally and mentally. For hours they remained near each other, exchanging fragments of stories, listening, and learning. Jeremiah spoke of life on the ranch, the challenges of tending cattle and crops, the harshness of storms, and the satisfaction of working with the land. She shared stories of her people, the wisdom of survival, the lessons learned from generations, and the courage it took to defend a home under constant threat. By the end of the day, the tension that had defined the morning had shifted. It had not disappeared, for caution was still necessary, but it had transformed into understanding. They had begun to see each other not as enemies, but as humans navigating a difficult world with skill, courage, and respect. And in that quiet desert afternoon, with the sun beginning its descent, Jeremiah realized something important. Understanding could be more powerful than skill, patience more powerful than fear, and respect more powerful than instinct. He had caught the arrow, but in truth he had also caught a glimpse of something far greater, the possibility of trust and the recognition of courage in another human being. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows across the plains. The light softened the harsh contours of the land, painting the dry grasses and rugged hills in shades of orange and gold. Jeremiah and the woman stood apart, a small distance between them, yet the tension that had filled the morning and afternoon had begun to dissolve. There was still caution, yes, but there was also a quiet understanding, a recognition that neither needed to be an enemy to the other. Jeremiah adjusted his stance, keeping his hands visible, and spoke in a calm voice. "The day is ending," he said, "and we should rest. You have walked a long way, and the land is not forgiving. Perhaps we can find shelter before the night grows cold." His words were careful, filled with respect. He wanted her to know that he was sincere, that the promise he had made earlier, to avoid harm, was still true. The woman considered him, her dark eyes scanning his face for any sign of deceit. But she found none. He spoke with honesty, his presence steady and measured. Slowly she nodded, lowering her gaze for a moment before looking back at him. "Perhaps that is wise," she said. Her voice was quiet but firm. "The desert can be merciless when the sun falls, and even the strongest must find shelter to survive." They moved slowly across the plains, each careful to keep a respectful distance while walking toward a small cluster of trees near the edge of the ranch. The trees were sparse but offered some protection from the wind and the coming chill. As they walked, Jeremiah noticed the careful way she moved, the way her eyes scanned the horizon, and the way she carried herself. Always alert, always aware. He respected that skill, knowing it had kept her alive for years. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence was not awkward. It was a shared acknowledgement of everything that had occurred. Each had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, and each had survived by relying on skill, patience, and understanding. Jeremiah could feel the weight of the arrow in his mind, not just the physical reminder of the encounter, but the significance of the moment. It had been a test, and both had passed. Finally, the woman spoke, her voice soft. "Oh, you could have been hurt," she said, almost to herself. "Or worse. And yet, you remained calm. You did not strike back. You did not act with anger or fear. That is not common." Jeremiah smiled faintly, feeling the tension in his chest ease. "It is not easy," he admitted, "but I have learned that understanding is stronger than fear. Patience is stronger than anger. And respect. Respect can carry a man further than skill alone." His words were gentle, but they carried a weight built from years of experience. They reached the small trees, and Jeremiah gestured toward the shade. "Rest here for a moment," he said. "The sun will set soon, and it will be cooler. We can talk more if you wish." The woman nodded, placing her bow carefully against a tree trunk. She eased herself to the ground, her movements deliberate and careful, as if she were testing the stability of the earth beneath her. Jeremiah sat across from her, keeping his distance but watching attentively. He could see the lines of tension slowly leave her face, the way her shoulders relaxed, and the subtle change in her breathing. She was still alert, but she had begun to trust the moment, to trust him. That trust was fragile, but it was real. For a while they simply sat, watching the sun sink lower and the shadows grow longer. The plains seemed quieter now, the wind carrying only faint whispers through the grass. Jeremiah thought about the events of the day, the arrow, the standoff, the conversation, and realized how rare such moments were. In the harshness of the desert, in the struggles of survival, it was uncommon to encounter someone who could test you, challenge you, and yet reveal truth and courage at the same time. The woman broke the silence again, her voice tinged with reflection. "I have lived my life learning to protect, to survive, to be ready for anything. But today was different. I did not expect to find someone who would listen, who would understand. That gives hope." Jeremiah nodded, his expression softening. "Hope is rare," he said, "but it is worth seeking. And it can grow, even in harsh places like this. We have seen that today." His words were careful, not overbearing, allowing her to absorb the meaning without feeling pressured. They talked as the sun dipped closer to the horizon. She shared stories of her family, of the lessons passed down through generations, and of the strength required to survive in a world that often misunderstood her people. Jeremiah shared stories of life on the ranch, of storms that destroyed crops, cattle that wandered too far, and the quiet satisfaction of a hard day's work. Each story built a bridge between them, connecting two lives shaped by challenge, courage, and resilience. The shadows grew longer, and the air cooled. Jeremiah offered water and simple bread he had carried for himself, and the woman accepted. The act was small, but it carried meaning, a gesture of trust, shared humanity, and recognition of mutual respect. It was a quiet acknowledgement that the world, though harsh, could hold moments of connection, understanding, and care. As darkness fell, they remained near the trees, the first stars appearing overhead. The plain stretched endlessly, quiet and vast, but the tension that had defined the day had lifted. Jeremiah felt a sense of relief, not just for his own safety, but for the fragile bond that had begun to form between them. The woman, too, seemed more at ease, her gaze softer, her body less rigid. "You will leave soon," Jeremiah said gently. "I do not wish to keep you here against your will. The land belongs to no one entirely, and each of us must follow our path." She nodded, her eyes reflecting the first stars. "Yes," she said, "I must return. But I will remember this day. I will remember that not all who come into our world seek to harm us. That is important." Jeremiah watched her carefully, noting the subtle changes in her posture, the way her gaze lingered on the plains, and the quiet strength in her voice. "Remember that respect and understanding can travel further than fear," he said, "and that courage is not just in skill, but in choice." She nodded again, a faint smile touching her lips. She picked up her bow, adjusting the strap over her shoulder, and took a careful step back. Then, with quiet grace, she moved toward the tree line, pausing only once to look back. Her eyes met Jeremiah's, and in that gaze there was acknowledgment, a silent promise that this encounter would not be forgotten, that the lesson of understanding and courage would remain with both of them. Jeremiah watched her disappear into the shadows of the trees, feeling a mix of relief and contemplation. The plains were quiet again, the wind carrying only the faint rustle of grass and distant calls of wildlife. He realized that the day had changed something in him, something beyond survival or skill. He had witnessed courage, skill, and honesty in someone from a world very different from his own, and he had learned that understanding could bridge even the widest gaps. He returned to his ranch house as the stars grew brighter, the cool night settling over the land. The memory of the arrow, the standoff, and the conversation remained vivid in his mind. He thought of the woman, of her courage and skill, and of the rare moment they had shared, a moment where fear had been replaced by understanding, and danger had been met with patience. In the days that followed, Jeremiah reflected on the encounter often. He worked the ranch, tended the animals, and watched the sun rise and set over the plains. But the memory of the woman stayed with him. It reminded him that life in the harshest places could still hold moments of connection, that courage and respect could exist even in the most tense situations, and that understanding could be stronger than fear. The woman never returned, at least not in sight. But Jeremiah often imagined her moving silently through the desert, skilled and strong, surviving as she always had, and he hoped that she too carried the memory of their meeting, the moment when two lives, shaped by very different worlds, had crossed paths, not as enemies, but as human beings capable of understanding and respect. In the quiet of the night, with the stars shining overhead and the wind rustling through the grasses, Jeremiah sat by the window of his ranch house and thought about the day. The arrow had flown, but it had been caught. The danger had been met with calm. The fear had been replaced by understanding. And in that moment he realized something that stayed with him forever, that courage, respect, and patience could shape outcomes more powerful than skill alone, and that the connections we make, even briefly, could leave a lasting mark on the world and on our hearts. The plains stretched endlessly beyond the ranch, quiet and eternal. Jeremiah knew that life would continue, that challenges would come, and that danger would never be far. But he also knew that the day had taught him a lesson more valuable than any he had learned before. It was a lesson in trust, patience, understanding, and the rare power of recognizing the humanity in another, even in moments of fear and tension. And so, as the night deepened and the stars shone brighter, the rancher and the plains stood still, holding the memory of a day when courage met understanding, when fear gave way to respect, and when two lives, briefly intertwined, learned that even in the harshest places, humanity could shine through.